With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Yutes. We're going to start on Daf Yutes, Amid Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amid. Before we begin with the intro, just to speak out that Yaakov was asking yesterday, why is it that sometimes we use the expression of hoyel, other times we have the concept of mitoich. Obviously, there must be something nuanced but different. So we were just suggesting that the word mitoich sounds more like an inyan pnimi from the inside, versus hoyel sounds like an inyan makif. Or maybe in words of nigla, mitoich sounds like a siba, and hoyel sounds like a siman. Obviously, that has to work out. Anyways, today we're going to start learning, first of all, about a potential prohibition of someone toiveling any kalim during the Bein Hashmashos period, as we'll explain why would it be such a prohibition. That will lead us into the concept of machshavtoi nikeres mitoich masov, that at least at times, or generally it's correct to say that a person's intentions is evident through one's actions. And we're going to start with the Mishnah on Daf Yutes, the sugya that will go also into Daf Chaf, and that will be that until now we were learning about the dispensation of oichel nefesh, that one is allowed to violate what normally would be viewed as a malacha for food-related purposes. How do we apply this heted oichel nefesh when it comes to karbanos, which are being served, so to say, being offered kaviyachol to God Almighty? Now we're going to have here machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. And here again, we're going to have in the Gemara various versions to understand better exactly where are they arguing concerning what karbanis are they arguing. And then we're going to have a karban oila, which is b'chlam not eaten by kohanim. We're going to have a karban shlamim, but we're going to have karbanoi shlamim that are connected to the yantiv versus nadarim and nadavis, which will be the general term we will use to karbanis, to private karbanis, whether oila or shlamim, that a person either made a vow, harei olai, it's upon me to bring a carbon, or a person designated an actual animal and said, this animal will be an oil, or this animal will be a shlamim. That's called a nedava, either on me or on the animal. The question is, l'shitas Beis Hillel, could they be brought on Yom Tov? We're not speaking about Cholamoid, we're speaking about on Yom Tov proper or not. And again, there's a different shlamim mezitin, but shlamim doesn't have to be brought today. It can be brought on any time. We're going to learn a clear machlekes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel as to whether smicha is done on a carbon on Yom Tov. There is an isur midrabanan to use an animal, to ride an animal on Shabbos and on Yom Tov. Smicha, which really means to lean with all of your might on the head of the animal, that is in violation of the general rabbinic decree. However, do we say, no, you have to do smicha? If the carbon is brought, smicha is going to be brought or not? That's also going to lead us to a very important machlokes that we will also have earlier on in Masechta Rosh Hashanah regarding the lav of Baal Ta'achar. When a person makes a neder or a nedava, even though it's ideal for the person to bring that carbon as soon as possible, question is, if a person does not, and the Torah says, don't delay lois ta'achar, Baal Ta'achar, when is a person violating that lav? It's certainly connected, according to most of the Tanoim, to the passage of 3 Yomim Tovim. Question is, do they have to pass Kisidron? So, for example, if a person makes a vow after Pesach, will he violate Baal Ta'achar, as we'll see, according to some opinions, only next year after Sukkot, not after the coming Sukkot? Because you need to have 3 Yomim Tovim pass Kiseder, Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot for them the person to violate. There's going to be other Tanoim that hold when any 3 regalim pass, it doesn't matter to say that the person will be in violation. There's going to be a Tana that holds that Sukkot is the only Ki Yom Tov. When Sukkot passes, then you'll be violating. We will be learning the difference between a Shalmei Chagiga and a Shalmei Simcha. In other words, every day, every Yom Tov, every Yid not only has a mitzvah, every man has an obligation to appear in the Azara, but he has to come not empty-handed, but with an oilas re'iyah and with a shalmei chagiga. Aside of there being an obligation on the person to bring a shlamim connected to the Yom Tov, there was something else called shalmei simcha. Now, shalmei simcha doesn't mean that I have to bring a carbon. Shalmei Simcha means that I must celebrate Simcha by eating meat of kachim. If I already have a carbon for any other reason, but I have meat of a carbon, I will be fulfilling Shalmei Simcha. I'm going to have Simcha through eating Psar Kachim. Shalmei Chagiga means that I have to bring a carbon connected to this Chag. Why will that? This will be very negeya, because there is a rule that kol davar shebachoiva einoi ba ela min achulin. And therefore, as we will see, if a person, for example, has to bring a carbon toida, and they brought a carbon toida, so now they have meat. So as far as Shalmei Simcha is concerned, you fulfill your Shalmei Simcha by eating the carbon toida. You were anyways mechoyev to bring the carbon toida, so what? I'm having psar kachim. However, you can never use, at least as a rule, your carbon toida that anyways you were mechoyev to bring, so to say, double dipping, to also cover your obligation of Shalmei Chagiga. Perhaps if a person, when the person designates the toida, and they make a tanai, they make a stipulation, I am designating this toida bit tanai, that it should also cover my obligation of Shalmei Chagiga, whether that tanai will be effective or not. L'shitas Rashi or l'shitas Tosfos will very much depend on the order of how you worded that stipulation, and that will be the last sugya that we will learn today. That there are many things that theoretically could work, but you have to know how to be mesaded it. And Seder B'chlal in life is of utmost importance, as we'll apply it to our halacha over here, and a lot of many other dinim, many other topics. This is just a general outline. We are going to start on Daf Yutes Amud Aleph in the beginning of the second line from the top of the Amud. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shar kol yom. Says the Gemara, Tanu Rabbanan. We learned in a Beitzah. Kli shenitma me'erev Yom Tov, as we are learning the sugya. Keli that became tamei from before Yom Tov, ein madbilen oisoi bein hashmashos. So we learned that there is an isur derabanan to toivel keli on Yom Tov, and yesterday's daf we learned 4 different suggestions, 4 different approaches. Bein hashmashos, as Rashi reminds us, 19 lines from the top of the Amid. In English, it's called twilight. Is halachically a zman in between day and night. That's sofik yoim, sofik laila. A person should not say the isur of tefillas kelim is only midrabanan. I am at a time which still might be day. In other words, it's only a sofik if it's called Yom Tov. Maybe sofik derabanan. Let's be lenient, which is what we say in most times. Not over here. Even already bein hashmashos, you may not toivel kelim. So says the Tanach. Upon which says Rabbi Shimon Shizuri, you're kidding me? Bein hashmashos, I agree with you, but I don't need for you to tell me that you can't toivel kelim bein hashmashos going into Yom Tov, because there is a general prohibition to toivel kelim during any bein hashmashos. Af b'choil ein madbilin oisoi. Wow. So there's no need to tell me your halach. Now, what would be the issue of toiveling a keli bein hashmashos? Who cares if it's twilight? Who cares if it's sofik yom, sofik laila? So that says Rab Shimon Shizuri, b'pnei shetzarich heret shemesh. There is a rule that when something is tamei today, both a person and a keli, even after the mikvah, there is a certain vestige of tuma on the person. Makes a lot of sense. Everything goes after the beginning. When a person begins the day on the right foot, let's speak in the positive, the whole day is better. You wake up in the morning and you begin to learn, especially if it's earlier, it's going to affect in a good way the whole day. But on the opposite, if the day begins betuma, even though you went to the mikvah, the fact that it began betuma, it has some sort of negative effect. Now, it's the vestige of tuma doesn't affect all of the dinim. We're going to learn pratim in the 3rd Pedic of Chagiga. For certain things we don't care, but for other things we do. What will completely remove the tumah? Night, when the day has to completely end. And indeed, that's the beginning of the whole Shas in Mishnayos and Torah Shebal Peh. Right? That me'emasai koren neshama ba'arvin b'shnosha hakoyanim nechnasam lechol b'trumasim. That means if a kohen was tamei, even though they went to the mikvah, as far as truma is concerned, they have to wait until Herav Shemesh. And the same thing is with kelim. If you want to use this keli for truma, you want to make sure the keli is not mitamei the truma, not only mikvah, wait until Herav Shemesh. Now, if a person is going to take their keli to the mikvah, bein hashmashas, Rab Shimon Shazuri is afraid, this person might think that they took the keli to the mikvah at day, and then when it's vaday laila, boom, you already have the head of shemesh. But we're not going to say that, because since bein hashmashas might already be night, if you take an item to the mikvah already at night, head of shemesh means that after you took it to the mikvah, now you have to wait until nightfall, which means it's only going to become completely purified tomorrow night. The person l'chayda won't know that. They won't know that. So to prevent a person from using a keli that is still with some vestige of tumah, they made a takana, never take it bein hashmashas. Okay, Tzvika, you good? Good. So now the Tanach kama. What he doesn't hold, that certain things need to have head of shemesh. I know the fact that he has to say that you may not take it bein hashmashas only when it comes as a yontiv, mashma, that he allows you to take it to the mikveh by bein hashmashas. Why aren't we afraid that this person might use it right when it gets dark? So Amar Rava, I want you to know that Ash Kachtino L'Rabbanan Devei Rav, when I found the yeshiva Bachrim of the Rav, the Yosvi v'Ka Amri, I asked them, what do you think? What's going on over here? What's underlying this machlokes? So they suggested that the that the issue here is whether we halachically could say that a person's intentions is evident from his actions, meaning the hechidami going to knock it manabi. The case of the Beitzah is that he's holding a keli v'rohit v'azal and he's running bein hashmashas lad pula. He's running. Why is he running? So the Tanakama holds, again, that's the word of machshavta nikeres mitoich ma'asav, that high the korohit v'ozil, you know why he's running, is a raya that proves that meida yoda, that he knows the boy ahead of shemesh, and that's why he's trying to toivel it before bein hashmashas. He knows that. Now he doesn't know that he missed the time. He toiveled it during bein hashmashas, but the moment he'll discover that he taka toiveled it by bein hashmashas, he's going to wait until tomorrow night. You see that this person knows that there's an issue of head of shemesh. He's trying to chaparain and do it before bein hashmashas. Once we notice that, let him toivel it whenever, and then he'll find out. And then if he'll find out that he taka already did it in bein hashmashas, he'll wait until the next day. Umar Sava, that's Rab Shimon Shazuri. Machmas malach lehu de koroit. Maybe he's running simply because he has work to do afterwards. This is not the last task of the day. Mela, the last task of the day, you're already chilling out. He doesn't know about the dinam of head of shemesh, which is why even when he's running, you do not allow him. This is what the Talmidim of the Vei Rav, of the Shiva of Rav, was suggesting to Rava to explain the machlokes, the first white line. However, no, Rava says, and I told them, no, I like what you're saying, but I'm gonna apply it as following. Everyone will agree that when a person is running, we say he knows that there is an issue of head of shemesh, and we allow him to toivel it. He's toiveling it bein hashmashas. When he'll find out that he did it bein hashmashas, and then he won't use it until tomorrow night. Ki pligi, the machlokes, the area of the machlokes is only going the itmi bepachos meka'adosh. Halacha is that the shmoyne shiratzim, that in part tuma, even if you only have a part of a sheretz of any of those shmoyne shiratzim, and we know halacha l'moshe misinai that even if a piece of a sheretz only has the size of an adasha, of a lentil, it still has the koyach to be metame to one part to convey tuma. Less than the ha'adasha cannot be metame. Here you have a person that has a keli that had contact with less of a adasha of a sheretz. Really, that item is not tummy. However, this person doesn't know that halacha. He has a question mark. Also, and he came to the sages and lishayule to ask the pochus mikadasha itmi oiloi. So we see that this person is ignorant when it comes to some of the halachas of tum and tara. So Mar Savar, this goes at Rab Shimon Shazuri, that mida holy gomer head of shamish lamei gomer. Even though he's running, normally we say, yeah, you're running, you know about, you got to do it before bein hashmashas. But there is a small possibility you're running because you are in a rush. You're running because you have work to do. You're running because you want to do homework with your kids. What are you running for to do work? Okay, we normally wouldn't say it, but here that we see that this yid doesn't know the dinim properly. If he doesn't know one din, maybe he doesn't know the other din. And in such a case, is where Rab Shimon Shazuri says you may never toivel kelim during Bein Hashmoshes. It is during that case that Omar Sova the Tanach holds that just because a person is not knowledgeable in one of the many dinim of Tumah and Tara, we do not say, if you don't know this, maybe you know nothing. No, what you don't know, you don't know. Hohed of Shemesh, we're going to continue to presume that you know about this important rule. And since you are running, so therefore we say, the running in itself indicates, it's not a proof, but it's an indication that he's trying to get it in before Bein Hashmoshes. Once we see the person is attempting to do something prior to Bein Hashmoshes, let that person do it whenever he does it. Because even if he does it already during Bein Hashmoshes, when he'll find out, he won't use that keli for Truma until the next day. All right. And now we are referring to the end of the Mishnah on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis, where the Mishnah says that you are allowed to be toivel keli on Yom Tov migav ligav. Migav ligav means from one purpose to another purpose. Okay, there's an isur d'Rabbanan to toivel kelim on Yom Tov. What's this exception? What does it mean? So Tanach Rabbanan ketzad migav ligav. So the Beitzah explains the following: that haroitze lasois gitoy al gabe kadoy or kadoy al gabe gitoy. Gas means a wine press. Kad means an olive press. We're going to learn more details at the end of Chagiga. But you should know that when a person goes to the mikveh, not now, during the times of people's adherence to the dinim of Tumah and Tara properly, if I have in mind that I'm going to the mikveh because I want to eat Meiser Sheni, and now I say, you know what, let me eat Truma, I have to go to the mikveh again. Even though I went to the mikveh, I was mindful not to become tummy again. Going to the mikveh, for one, doesn't allow you to be viewed as someone who's tired for something else that has a higher standard of tahara. Now, there are people, therefore, that applied this concept even when halachically they did not have to. So, for example, if I'm toiveling a keli because I want to use it in my wine press, and then I decide, you know what, I'm going to use this utensil in my olive press. Here, al pidin, you don't have to toivel it again. But there are people that felt that since I'm changing the purpose for this keli, I'll be machmer and I'll take it to the mikvah again. Says the Mishnah, beautiful din. First of all, very nice, good for you. The takonas chachamim not to take a keli to the mikvah on Yom Tov is only when the keli was tamei, and you need to take it to the mikvah to be allowed to use it b'tahara. That type of tefillah is asur on Yom Tov. If you want to do a tefillah of a chumrah, which is really halachically not changing a status, that we allow for you to do. You're not violating a Rabbanan because it wasn't necessary to begin with.
So what's the point? What's the point of taking the mikveh if there is no need to begin with?
So I mentioned, Yakir, since Benegeya, other halachas of Tumah and Tara, limashal, like I gave, if a person is going to the mikveh because the kohen wants to make sure that he can eat truma b'tahara, and then he says, you know what, I want to use it for a kachim. There, the halacha is he has to take it to the mikveh again. You can argue why he took it to the mikveh. It's the same mikveh. He was very mindful. Nothing touched it. It did not become tamei. Still, when it comes to the concept of toiveling for one's level, if you want to use it for something that he has a higher level, we don't allow you without going to the mikveh again. So this is a halacha. So therefore, people were machman on themselves to make sure they'll never forget that. They said that anytime I toivel a keli for one purpose, if I want to change the purpose, I'm going to toivel it again. So chumrah, it makes sense. It fits that. Okay. Similarly, the last line in the Mishnah, when the Mishnah says you also are allowed to go to the mikvah, mechabura lachabura, from one group to the other, similar concept. If a person was going to be eating, Rashi says, with one group his Korban Pesach, and the person went to the mikvah to make sure that they're going to eat it b'tahara, but they always had in mind eating the Korban Pesach with one group. Now we know that before the shechita, you can change your mind. You can leave one group and join another. And that's what happened. Here again, by the letter of the law, you don't have to go to the mikvah again. But there were people that felt that whenever you make a change, when it comes to Tumah and Tara, go to the mikvah again. or the keli is going to be used with the other group, take the keli to the mikvah again. Here says the Mishnah, you are allowed to take it to the mikvah on Yom Tov proper, because since it's taka not needed, so therefore there's a big chiddush with that, right? Let's go with the last, just to point out the novelty. The last approach in the Gemara on Daf Yud Ches in the bottom was Rava, that it's nira, right? Kemisak and keli. You can argue it's still nira kemisak and keli. You see someone taking something to the mikvah, but the answer is no. No, that it's not misak and keli because it was misukan already. Okay. We're starting a sugya that's beautiful. Now it's mamish. We're going to go for a while into a whole sugya of, again, oichel nefesh, not private, which is permitted. That's the pasuk in Parshas Boy. Ach asher ye'achel l'chol nefesh hu levado ye'asa lochem hutra l'tzorech oichel nefesh. Here we're going to apply the doing various malachas l'tzorech karbanos, which one can argue, well, if it's a carbon, it's being given to Hashem, it's achilas mizbeach oichel. We're going to see whether we apply that or not, says the Mishnah. And now clearly there's a machlokes b'Shamai and b'Hillel, and then as we will learn the sugya, there's going to be a machlokes as to what's their machlokes. B'Shamai yoimrim meviim shlamim, that only a shlamim can be brought. In other words, not a carbon oila. Guys, don't make one mistake over here. The oilas that are connected to Yom Tif, as well as the Talmud, the morning Talmud, which is an oila. If you remember, we learned this in Yuma. Whenever the Torah uses the words bimoy adoi, this has to be brought in its appointed time. That for sure overrides Yom Tif. It even overrides Shabbos. Where Shabbos, there's no heter l'tzorech oichel nefesh. You bring the Talmud on Shabbos and the Beis Hamikdash, or you bring the carbon musaf. We're not speaking, at least let's begin, the Shlomim is not clear. Karbanis that are connected to Yom Tov are brought. Now, what about Karbanis Tzibur that are connected to Yom Tov? What about a carbon Yachid that's connected to Yom Tov? So Beishamai says you can bring the Shlomim. Rashi says, because even though some of it is burnt on the Mizbeach, some of it is eaten by the owners. That's a carbon Shlomim. However, even those that could be brought, ve'ein soimchin aleim. You may not do the act of smicha. Smicha means leaning on the head of the animal with all of your might, with both of your hands. Why may you not do smicha? Here again, Rashi tells us we have this gezeda of hishtamshus bebalachayim. One may not make use of animals, which is sitting, riding on animals, which even will mean to properly lean on the animals. All of that was a takana, that if you're going to ride an animal, you might rip off a branch to use it as a whip. So you may not do smicha. Abel says, Beishamai, loy oilos. Loy oilos. And here Garashi points out, oilos means aside of the communal oilos, tamidim and musafim, that have a zman kavua, you may not bring. An oilas yachid, a private oilah, even connected to Yom Tiv, and by the way, every Yom Tov we needed to bring a oilas re'iyah and a shalmei chagiga connected to Yom Tov. So according to Beis Shammai, shalmei chagiga may be brought because you're going to be eating from it. Oilas re'iyah, you're going to bring it on Chol HaMoed. You're going to bring it after the day of Yom Tov, and by the way, you can bring it for a whole week, and that's even by Shavuos, you can bring it for a whole week, but you may not bring it on Yom Tov proper. Why? Rashi lefi she'ein bo achilas hedyet, even though it's going to be consumed by the altar, and therefore, when the Torah says hu levade ye'ase lochem, taiches Beis Shammai, what is allowed to be done for food related? Lochem, not legavoya. They argue twice with Beis Shammai. Number one, not only can you bring a shlamim, you can also bring an oilah. Now, is Beis Hillel saying that you can bring a shlamim that's only connected to Yom Tiv? Or is Beis Hillel saying that even a carbon that doesn't have a fixed time, person made a vow to bring a shlamim, maybe even that may be brought on Yom Tiv? That will be a machlokes in Tanoim, what Beis Hillel holds. But you can bring a shlamim and an oilah. And number two, when you bring a carbon that needs to have smicha, yes, v'soimchin aleim, you are allowed to do smicha. We override the general takana of not making use of balachayim. Actually, the very fact that this carbon overrides Yom Tiv, as we'll see in the Gemara, automatically means that smicha also will be allowed to be done. And a lot more about this machlekes as we will unpackage this Gemara. So let's begin with the shlamim and understanding better shitas Beishamai. When Beishamai says you can bring a shlamim. So Amar Ula says, Ula, I want you to know that the machlekes regarding Beishamai Beisilol is only Beishalmei Chagiga Lismoich. Beishamai, who says you can bring a shlamim, Beishamai doesn't mean that you can bring a neder, a voluntary shlamim. No, even though people eat of it, it's not connected to the Yom Tiv. He's only allowing you to bring a shlamim that's connected to the Yom Tiv, right? So you can bring it, and nevertheless, Zok Beishamai, that Shalmei Chagiga may not have smicha. Now we're going to see in next daf, what does Beishamai mean? You b'chlal don't do smicha, or maybe he holds that you have to do smicha erev Yom Tiv. That could be, even though you can say that normally the rule is takev, that right after you do smicha, you do shchita. Beishamai doesn't subscribe to that. We're going to see more about the when, if, later. And v'oila sre'iyah, the oila that's connected to Yom Tiv. That on that, Beishamai says you may not bring it on Yom Tiv. You're going to bring it on Cholamoyed. On Shavuos, there's no Cholamoyed. You're going to bring it the next day during the Yemei Tashlumin. But you can't bring it on Yom Tiv. Why is that? Because the Beishamai Savrei, when it says v'chagoisim oisoy chag lashem, so the word lashem is hinting that even on Yom Tiv you can bring it. That's only the chagiga. Only the chagiga can be brought to God, and actually that tells us that the oilas re'iyah, even though it's related to Yom Tiv, cannot be brought. Beis Hillel says, the word Lashem means anything that's connected to La Hashem. Guys, Lashem here doesn't just mean to God. All the korbanos are being brought to Hashem. The Lashem means it's connected to the Yom Tiv. Any korban connected to the Yom Tiv, including the obligation of every male to bring an oilas re'iyah, since you're bringing it Lashem, even though it's not eaten at all, is also allowed to be brought on Yom Tiv. The point of Ula is, Avol nedarim unedavois, both oilos and even shlamim, even though every carbon shlamim is eaten a little bit by the kahanim, it's eaten also by the owners. Divrei hakol ein kerevim b'yontiv. Very good. So says Ula. V'chein omar Rav Ada bar Ahava, like Ula, that after we learned shitas Beis Hillel, it sounds like, well, you can bring an oilo, you can bring a shlamim. No, these are only karbanos related to Yom Tov, the karbanos yachid, which is why Beishamai holds that even the oilo cannot be brought. Beishamai is moided that the tamid is brought, that the musaf is brought, but not karbanos yachid, even related to Yom Tov. Beis Hillel is lenient, but nedarim and nedavos. I made a vow, right? I made a pledge. I can bring it whenever. Not whenever. There's thou shall not delay. We'll see about that later, but you can't bring it on Yom Tov. Ein kerevim Yom Tov, even according to Beis Hillel. Very nice. It says in Abraisa, Amar Rab Shimon ben Elazar. Here again, it's beautiful throughout this Masechta. We have Rab Shimon ben Elazar changing, or he brings a different version of what the machlekes is. Concerning an oila she'ena shel Yom Tiv, which is an oila of a neder or a nedava, here is where everyone agrees, even Beis Hillel, she'ena keneva b'Yom Tiv. Also, the al shlamim she'en shel Yom Tiv, everyone agrees that they are brought on Yom Tiv. And by the way, this doesn't only include the shalmei chagiga, which you have to bring. This even includes shalmei simcha. Shalmei Simcha means that I have a separate obligation to eat sacrificial meat on Yom Tiv. So let's say I fulfilled my Shalmei Chagiga in the beginning of Yom Tiv, but now it's Shvi'ah Shel Pesach. Now it's Shvi'ah Shel Pesach, it's still I have to have Shalmei Simcha. You can bring it according to everyone. Shekerevim b'Yom Tiv. Al menech, where do they argue? Al oila shehi shel Yom Tiv. And now here you have the words. Ba'al shlamim she'enam shel Yom Tiv. A private neder of a shlamim. that they argue about this, that mamish goes against Ula. Shebeshamim oimrim taka lo yavi, and Beis Hillel oimrim yes yavi. Clearly, Beis Hillel holds, according to Rav Shimon ben Elazar, that a shlamim not Yom Tov related is brought on Yom Tov. It makes sense because it's oichel nefesh, because there's achilas hedyin. So because of this problem, the Gemara is saying tritz ve'emahachi. Tritz ve'emahachi means we are amending this brayso. That Amar Rav Shimon ben Elazar lo nechloku b'shamay Beis Hillel, a new version. He's making a new version for this not to contradict Ula. Al oila u shlamim both. If tar she'enim shel yantiv, everyone is moida, exactly like Ula says, she'en krevim b'yantiv. Likewise, everyone agrees al shlamim she'en shel yantiv, she'krevim b'yantiv. Al menechluku al oila shel yantiv. She'b'shamim emrim lo yavi, u'Beis Hillel avi yavi. Says the Gemara, Rabbi Yosef Amar, when you only have one version of a Tana, and Ula obviously said otherwise, and on the presumption that Ula knew all of the works of the Tanoim, for Ula not to be contradicted, you have to amend the Braisa. But Rabbi Yosef says, we know that there are other Tanoim, there are other Braisas that clearly back up Ula. So therefore, why do I have to amend this Braisa? Why don't we say, which we do, that there is a machloikes Tanoim, what Beis Hillel holds, and Ula has the right to pick the side of one Tana. And like this, you don't have to amend a Braisa. In other words, Amar Rabbi Yosef, 3 lines from the bottom, Tanoi shakalt ma'alma, you're taking away other works of Tanoim. Don't you know there are other Braisas? Don't you know that we have a Braisa that says exactly what Ula said later? So it doesn't bother me to leave the girsa of this Braisa of Rav Shimon ben Elazar. Ula goes like the other one. That Tanoi, the Tanya, Shlamim haboyim machmas yamtiv, second to last line, be yamtiv. Here is where Beishami says, Soimech aleim erev yamtiv. Here we have another detail. It's Beishami and our Mishnah says, don't do smicha. Here it's very clear, it's not don't do smicha. Don't do smicha on yamtiv, do smicha erev yamtiv. V'shoichtan be yamtiv. Beis Hillel oimrim, Soimech aleim be yamtiv, v'shoichtan be yamtiv. But this is regarding shlamim that is connected to yamtiv, which is, let's go Shalmei Chagiga, Daf Yutes Amid Beis. Avol clear, Nedarim unedavois divrei hakol ein kerevim b'yamtiv. So Ula clearly is saying what this Braisa says. So Rav Yosef is saying, he lost his vision, they have the amazing memories. Be connected somehow. He says, no, leave the Braisa the way it is. I have this one. Ula will go like this one. So in other words, there is a machloikes Tanoim. What is Shitas Beis Hillel? There's a machloikes Tanoim, exactly where are they arguing? And indeed, Bahane Tanoi, Kahane Tanoi. No, this is the question, guys. The question is, can a person bring on Yom Tov, not on Cholamoid, on Yom Tov personal oilos and shlamim? So oilos for sure not. Can you bring a shlamim? Does Beis Hillel allow you to do that? A machloikes Tanoim. And here the Tanya, another Braisa. Now, this Braisa doesn't explicitly word it the way we just worded it, but there's going to be a beautiful machloikas regarding a carbon toida. There's going to be the initial way of understanding it, and then ultimately the correct way of understanding it. But as we will see, one of the premises of this Braisa will be this question: can you bring a carbon shlamim on Yom Tov? Now, a toida, just to make it clear, is a shlamim. It's not mamish like a shlamim. It doesn't abide by all the rules of a shlamim. For example, a carbon shlamim can be eaten for 2 days and 1 night. A carbon doida can only be eaten for 1 day and 1 night. Now, parenthetically, the reason why today we make a sudas hoida'a is because since when a carbon toida was brought, a carbon toida has to be eaten with 40 loaves of bread. It comes with a lot of bread. Now, there were different types. The 40 loaves of breads were divided into 4 different types. 10. One group of 10 was chametz, mamash chametz. Now, since a carbon toida has to be eaten 1 day and 1 night, that means you had a relatively small window to consume it, not to, God forbid, allow anything to be left over. You were forced to invite many people to join you. And that's the source of having a sudas hoidah and inviting a lot of people with at least Rabbanan to join the meal as well. Okay, but now let's go like this. Hanatanoi kahanatanoi, the Tanya. Ein meviim toida b'chag hamatzos. On Pesach, you can bring a korban toida. Korban toida has in it, like we mentioned, 10 of the 40 loaves are chametz. You can't have chametz on Pesach. Today, that the mizmar l'soida unashalma panim sefosenu is connected to the korban toida. As we know, we don't say mizmar l'soida during Pesach. We actually don't even say mizmar l'soida on Erev Pesach, as we'll see soon the pshat in this Beitzah. Okay, so number one is you can't bring a Torah on Pesach. Why? Mipnei chametz sheba. Likewise, this is the Tanach Shita. V'loi ba'atzeres. You may not bring a korban toida on Shavuos. Mipnei shahu yomtiv. Clear. In other words, what does the Tanach hold? A korban toida is in the category of a neder and a davar. Now I know that you bring it arba'a tzrichim lahoidos v'chol hachayim achoila yam yisurim midbar. We know that, but it's not related to any specific time frame. That's pshat nadarim and nadavos. And if you would not pledge to bring the toida, you wouldn't bring it. You should have, but you have to pledge to bring it. So the fact that this Tana holds that it cannot be brought on Atzeres, in other words, when the Tana says you can't bring it on Pesach, it means not even on Chol HaMoed, because there's chametz. You can't bring it on Atzeres. Now we paskin like Besillo. Yet this Tana says that a neder and a dava is not brought on Yom Tov, even though the toid is eaten. Clearly, this will be right like the shita of Ula that says that even lebesillo divrei hakol ein kerevim b'Yom Tov. Avo, but let's keep on focusing on the Torah. Avo maybe adam toidase b'chag hasukos. Now, guys, obviously, what does it mean b'chag hasukos? The initial understanding on Chol HaMoed. You can bring it on Chol HaMoed. Now, Rav Shimon Oimer, no. We'll see soon what he says. No, but he's saying no. Harehu Oimer, he's quoting a pasuk in Parshas Re'eh that juxtaposes all of the three Yomim Tovim together. It says b'chag hamatzos, u'b'chag hashavuos, u'b'chag hasukos. The fact that we put them all three together teaches us kol sheba b'chag hamatzos is a korban that could be brought on Pesach. That yes, b'chag hashavuos u'b'chag hasukos. However, b'chol sheba b'chag hamatzos enema b'chag hashavuos u'b'chag hasukos. What exactly does Rav Shimon mean? The Gemara will elaborate soon. The way we're learning, it sounds like he's saying you can't even bring it on Chag HaSukkos, but again, we'll get back to that soon. And the third opinion in this Beitzah, because what we are focusing on right now is to show that there is a machloikes tanoim, whether a shalmei neder unudava is allowed to be brought on Yom Tov or not. We're using this Beitzah to point out from the Tanakh that says you may not bring it on Shavuos with our current understanding, because Toida is a neder unudava, may not be brought on Yom Tov. So which Tana argues with that? Rav Shimon Oimer, maybe Adam Teilasi b'chag hasukos. Number one. Number two, not only can you bring it on Sukkos, now does he mean on Yom Tov? Does he mean on Chol HaMoed? Let's go even the way we're learning on Chol HaMoed. A very important din, and that is, like we mentioned in the introduction, that on every Yom Tov I'm obligated to come with an oilas de'iyah and with what we call with a shalmei chagiga, with a shalmei chagiga. I'm obligated to bring a shalmei chagiga. I have to bring a korban. There is another mitzvah. I have to be the samachta b'chagecha. And the ultimate way of realizing samachta b'chagecha is by me eating meat of kachim. But I don't have to bring a korban for the Shalmei Simcha. If there is already meat from kachim and I eat it, I'm fulfilling the mitzvah. So therefore, says a second statement was of Rav Shimon that if I have to bring, for me to realize my Simcha, I can use my korban toida, even though it's not brought because of Yom Tov. I anyways would have to bring it. So what? I have a shlamim, here a toida, I'm eating it on Yom Tov, I have yoytze and my Simcha. But the ein yoytzeva mishum chagiga. But for me to double dip, there's a rule, like we mentioned, that kol davar shebechayva If God is obligating me to bring a carbon, I have to use what would otherwise be chulin. I can't take something that anyways I'm mechuyev to bring and double dip. That we don't allow. Now, where do we see from Rav Elazar ben Rav Shimon that he argues with the Tanakama and he holds that you could bring a neder and a dava? Now we're going to break down this Beitzah and we're going to show that indeed this is also part of the machlekes tanoim. So let's go. Amar Mar, recording now Rav Shimon. Ein meviim toida b'chag hamatzos. Oh no, I'm sorry, recording the Tanakama. Why? B'pnei chametz shebo. Says the Gemara Pshita. Of course. Why would you even think you can bring it? Amar Avada b'rei Rabbi Yitzchak. Or the that the answer was given in the name of Rav Shmuel bar Abba. I'll tell you what the Beitzah is really saying. Of course, you can't have a toida. You can't bring a toida on Pesach. It means the Beitzah, the Tanakama is saying you may not even bring a toida on that of Pesach. Why? I'll tell you why. When you bring a carbon toida, like we mentioned, how much time do you have to eat up all of that which is edible? One day and one night. The day that you bring it and that night. We learned in Psachim, even only midoiraisa. Already from midday out of Pesach, there's an isur doiraisa to eat chametz. You're not going to be chayv kares until the night, but you're not allowed to eat it. So a person might think, you know what? Let me chaparayim. Let me bring my carbon toida before chatzois. And you know what? I'll invite the ganze Welt and I'll eat up everything in 5 minutes. You're not allowed to do that. Why can you not do that? Because if not for today being out of Pesach, you would have a day and a night to finish eating up all that which you have to eat. By you bringing it on out of Pesach, you are limiting the time of consuming it. And if taka, you won't eat it until midday, you won't be allowed to eat it. And therefore it will become disqualified. So we subscribe, you may not eat kachim or bring kachim at a time that because of your chosen time, you are upping the chances of it becoming disqualified. You are limiting the time that it could be eaten. So therefore, you can't eat it even if you're confident that you'll finish it before this man is. Okay, so that's number one. So that's one clarification. Let's interpret the Tanakama. Then the Tanakama says, "V'loi batzeres." This we read correct. Why can't you bring it on the Yom Tov of Shavuos? Because taka mipnei shehu Yom Tov. And because Savar, this Tana holds that Nedarim and Nedavos ain't could even be Yom Tov. And guys, don't forget, the Shama or Beisilol, the Shama ain't a Mishnah even. It means that even Beisilol holds like that, like Ula. Then when the Beitzah continues the Tanakama, that Ein Avol maybe Adam to das Sukkos. What exactly does that mean, Amos? It can't mean that the Tanakama is saying that you can bring a carbon toida during the Yom Tov Atzmai. Of course not, because for Ha'amrat, V'loi ba'atzeres. Ella, what must it mean? It must mean that you could bring it b'choiloi shalmoyet. Oh, now we got a problem. Because if the Tanakama is speaking only about cholamoyed, which means that later when Rab Shimon says, that pshat would then mean is that Rab Shimon is saying that you can't even have it. You may not even bring it on Chalamoyet Sukkos. That's the pshat of what he's saying. So Maskal Lord Rab Zera, that doesn't make sense. It can be that there is a Tana that holds that a carbon toida cannot be brought on Chalamoyet Sukkos. Doesn't make sense. Why not? He uses this analogy. Hashta saloi say misaltinon, as we will learn in Masechtas Moed Katan, that a person on Cholamoyed is even allowed to gather wood that's connected to the ground and uproot it to gather wood for Yom Tov. No, it's mamish a violation of something which normally will be called a malacha. That is allowed on Cholamoyed. Are you telling me that you can't bring a carbon in the Beis Hamikdash on Cholamoyed? Doesn't make sense. And therefore, says the Gemara, of course you can bring a carbon on Cholamoyed, but the problem is the flow doesn't go. Because if the Tanakama was speaking about Cholamoyed, so then he's outlawing it on Cholamoyed. So Amar Abaye, let me clarify what they are arguing. Behakrava, as far as bringing the carbon toida kula amaloi pligi, that of course you can bring it on Cholamoyed Sukkos. Ki pligi, there's another whole machlokes going on in this Beitzah, and that is lemekam Allah bebalta achar. Exactly when will one be in violation of the pasuk that we have in Parshas Ki Seitze regarding the bringing of karbanos? Thou shalt not delay it. Now here it's kedai. We're going to have the sugya on Rosh Hashanah Daf Daled and Beis. Keep your finger in the Gemara. And I want to read the Rashi. There's time and to read out the Rashi. The Rashi is more or less on the same height, maybe 1 or 2 lines lower. Says Rashi, V'kula hach masnisan le'inyan bal ta'achar ayre. Rashi says like this. Tanakama holds like this. Kol hama'achar nidre shalosh regal. If you delay by not bringing your vows over 3 yomim tovim, 3 regalim, afilu shaloi kesidran, I don't care if it didn't go Pesach, Shavuot, Sukkot. I don't care the order, you're going to violate Bal Ta'achar. And the reason of that is, as we learn in Masechtas Rosh Hashanah, Mahai Kra, where the Torah says Shalish Pa'amim Bashana. And then the Torah adds Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos. So the Gemara asks over there, Lamali Lemichta B'Chag HaMatzos, U'B'Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, Kiv Nechsiv, Shalish Pa'amim. And from the context, we already read about all of the 3 Yomim Tovim. So Pshita B'Hanininu, because the Ha Minayu Kosalik. The Liyel Minei, it already speaks about Shomanas Chodesh Aviv. Before it says Shiva Shavuos Tisberlach, before we mentioned Chag HaSukkos, Shma Mina, that this repetition of these words, Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, is Labal Ta'achad. Loimer, Eile Kovati Loch Letashlim Matnisecha Unidorecha, that you have, in other words, thou shalt not delay. Guys, we're not saying that you can only bring a carbon during Yom Tov. No, bring a carbon, the sooner the better. But when do you violate Bal Ta'achar? When 3 Yomim Tovim pass. Now, since the Tanach holds that it doesn't matter the order of how it passed, it doesn't matter when you made the vow, right? If you make the vow right now, right? Today we're between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. The first Yom Tov is Sukkot. So according to him, when are you going to violate? Sukkot, Pesach, Shavuos. Ooh, if Shavuos passes, boom, you violated Bal Ta'achar. Doesn't have to go on the Seder. So now, that call me sheyesh olav toida. You made a vow now before Sukkot. Bring it on Sukkot. Makes a lot of sense. Why should you bring it on Sukkot? You can just say it by heart. Because since the Tanakh says, and everyone is Maida, on Pesach you're not allowed to bring it. On Shavuos, the Tanakh subscribes to the rule that you may not bring the Darim and the Davis on Yom Tov. So if you can't bring it on Pesach and you can't bring it on Shavuos, when is the only opportunity for you to bring it? Now on Sukkot. That is what he's saying. Tanakh is saying, bring it now. If you will not bring it now, you will violate Bal Ta'achar. I want to add something. I'm not going to violate Bal Ta'achar because I don't have to bring it over Yom Tov. It's an Eitzah Toiva. Eitzah Toiva means that most people that live then in Eretz Yisrael, they didn't stam go to Yerushalayim. They went there 3 times a year. So if they won't bring it on Sukkot, they will have to make a special trip not to violate Bal Ta'achar, because just going Pesach and just going Shavuos won't help them. Because you can't bring a Toida on Pesach. You can't even bring it out of Pesach. You can't bring it on Shavuos. That's what the Tanakh is saying. Now we'll read it inside the Gemara, and now we'll understand why Rab Shimon argues. Let's read it inside.
Rabbi,
yes.
Quick question here.
Yes.
Why can't we just say the carbon taida can be eaten on Sukkot as eichel nefesh?
So that's this whole topic, Tzvika. In other words, eichel nefesh that's not kachim related for sure could be made on Yom Tov. Question is, if you have a carbon, how do you view a carbon? That's the sole sugi. So I have a shlamim, not related to Yom Tov, like a carbon toida. Or a stama, I committed to bring a carbon shlamim. Do you say some of it is going to be eaten by me? We view the whole carbon as oichel nefesh. You can bring it. Or do we say, no. That hulavade yeyase lochem, we'll see more in tomorrow's next daf, that the heter oichel nefesh is something that's exclusively chulin. If it's kachim, then it's not included in the heter for oichel nefesh, but if it's Yom Tov related, if it's b'moyadoi, that's something else that you can bring.
Even though he's eating part of that carbon.
Yes. Clear. Now that's this whole topic, Tzvika. We are learning now the Shita, which is the Tanakama, like Ula, that even Beis Hillel holds that you cannot bring a neder and a dava of shlamim on Yom Tov. But there's another Shita, Bishitas Beis Hillel, that a shlamim could always be brought on Yom Tov, exactly like you're saying, Tzvika, because it's Oichel Nefesh. That's the Machlokes Tanoim B'Shitas B'Silum. But let's come back over here. Tanakama holds regarding Balta Achad that Sholish Regalim Amar Achmana Afilo Shleike Sidron, and therefore, if you don't want to make an extra trip to Yerushalayim, Eitza Toiva, even though you only made your vow before Sukkot, whenever it was before, bring it on Sukkot, because you're not going to have an opportunity on the other two Yomim Tovim, and if you won't bring it, you'll violate Balta Achad. Rab Shimon holds that Kesidron in Shaloi Kesidron Loi. The fact that the Torah orders it, Chag HaMatzos, Chag HaShavuos, Chag HaSukkos, you know what that means? Let's go right now. If we make a vow right now to bring a shlamim, Torah or any other shlamim, if we don't bring it on Sukkos, it's not even one Yom Tov yet. You only begin counting down the 3 Yomim Tovim by placing Pesach, Chag HaMatzos, the first of the 3. So if you don't bring it this year, Chag HaSukkos, when will you violate Balta Achad? Only next year, Chag HaSukkos. So you don't have that pressure. You don't have to bring it right now. If not, you're going to violate Balta Achad unless you'll make another trip. Now, what are we getting at? If that is the pshat, now let's go into the third time. When he said those words, what does he now mean? That can't be that statement, because that statement would be nothing new. He's not adding anything. That will be mamish like the Tanakama. Rab Shimon is adding to the Tanakama. Elo b'Yom Tov. What he means to say is that you can bring it on Yom Tov. In other words, Rab Shimon holds nedarim unadavis kerevim b'Yom Tov, which must mean that they argue what Beis Hillel holds. We follow Beis Hillel. So again, just Hana Tanoi, there's a machlokes Tanoi, what a shitas Beis Hillel. Now, if the point of Rab Elazar ben Rab Shimon arguing with the Tanakama is simply to say that you can bring it on Yom Tov, like for example, why didn't he mention Atzeres? Atzeres was the Yom Tov that the Tanakama mentioned. You don't bring it on Atzeres because it's Yom Tov. So he should have said, bring it on Atzeres. Umayshna Chag HaSukkos is the Nakat. I mean, he should argue on the same Yom Tov of the Tanakama. Answers the Gemara. There's another reason. Rab Shimon l'taimei, Rab Elazar Rab Shimon l'taimei. The Tanya, Rab Shimon oimer, like we just learned, that when it comes to the lav of Balta Achad, it has to be Kesidron. Where did he get that from? Because in Parshas Re'ei, lo yoimer Chag HaSukkos, the Torah first speaks about Chag HaMatzos, then the Torah speaks about Chag HaShavuos, then the Torah speaks about Chag HaSukkos. Then the Torah says Shalish Ba'amim. The one that's the most superfluous is Chag HaSukkos Boy HaKasuv Medaber. So why did the Torah have to mention Chag HaSukkos? Even if the Torah would have mentioned Pesach and Shavuos, we would have understood that the third one is Sukkos. That's Mamish, the Parsha of Sukkos. Loimar Shezeh Achrein. That's the source of Rab Shimon that holds that you're only over Balta Achad if the 3 Yomim Tovim pass by you Kisidron. Rab Elazar ben Rab Shimon Oimer. The reason why the Torah adds Chag HaSukkos, he holds, now this is another shita, Shezeh Goyrem. If you make a vow before Sukkos, my friends, you don't have 3 Yomim Tovim. It's not about 3 Yomim Tovim. It's that whenever Sukkos passes, boom, you are over on Balta Achad. Even if you made your vow right before Sukkos, if Chag HaSukkos passes, you are going to be violating Balta Achad. So the reason why Rab Elazar ben Rab Shimon opines, really what he's innovating over here, the ikar here is to say that you could bring it on Yom Tov. The reason why he chooses Sukkos is because everyone would bring all of their nadarim and nadavos over Sukkos, always, no matter when they made the vow, because if they won't bring it on Sukkos, they're going to be violating Balta Achad. But what's the bottom line? Clearly, there's a machlokes between the Tanakama and Rab Elazar ben Rab Shimon, whether nadarim and nadavos are kerevim b'Yom Tov or not. Now, the Mishnah says, Beis Hillel says, you bring them on Yom Tov. Yeah, the Mishnah is speaking about shlamim and even oilos that are connected to Yom Tov. We're speaking about nadarim and nadavis. So again, that's just to make it clear that this is our machlokes Tanach. And now, let's continue to break down and to understand the Beitzah. When the Beitzah says that the yoytze ba mishum simcha, that if you bring a carbon toida, since you're going to be eating sar kachim. That's the mitzvah of being misameach by eating sacrificial meat. But the ena yoytze mishum chagiga, was you have a chayvas gavra. You have to bring a side of the oilas re'iyah, a shalmei chagiga. You can't double dip. Says the Gemara Pshita, 3 lines from the first white line. Bringing a shalmei chagiga is an obligation, and we know. Okay, and not your previously pledged toida. So the Gemara says, like, the chiddush will be afal gav the parish. Parish means when you made a stipulation. The way we're going to learn our Gemara, like Rashi learns, like Tosfos learns, that really, if a person pledges to bring a korban toida, and this person knows how to word things, and he makes the right seder in the pledge, you will be allowed to bring one korban, both to fulfill your obligation of shalmei chagiga and your obligation of a toida. This is a person that made a pledge. He pledged it in the wrong seder, and that's the chiddush, that since he didn't know how to word it properly, it's only going to be for a toida, and it won't be for his obligation of a chagiga. And this is actually like Kidaboi Minei Rab Shimon ben Lakish, like Reish Lakish asked of his esteemed brother-in-law Rabbi Yechanan. If a person says Harei Olai Toida, Harei Olai Toida. Now here is the key. The key is that when it comes to kachim amirosoi legavoya kimesira lahedyet. In other words, when you make a statement regarding kachim, the statement is like the kinyan. Your statement finalizes the deal. So if you mention first Harei Olai Toida, and then even Toich Kedei Dibur, you add your stipulation. Ve'etzei ba yedei chagiga. Not, I'm bringing this for my chagiga, and I also want this to go for my toida. No, if you said Harei Olai Toida ve'etzei yedei chagiga. Similarly, if a person first says Hareini Nazir, it's amazing that your commitment of being a Nazir already includes the commitment to bring the 3 karbanos chatos elo asham at the end of your Yemei Nazirus. So Harei Olai Nazir, as far as kachim is concerned, means that I'm already mechayev myself to bring karbanos. And now I add va'agalach mima'is ma'aser sheni when I cut my hair, which is shem hamushal for bringing karbanos. I want to use ma'aser sheni money for my karbanos. Here again, there's a rule that you may not use. Right, you have a chayv to bring karbanos at the end of your nazirus. Ma'aser sheni money is not called chulin. You may not use it for it. But interestingly, if a person says, I am going to use ma'aser sheni mois for my commitment of nazirus, then you will be allowed to do it, because you lechatchila are stipulating that you're only becoming a nazir because you are allowed to bring mois ma'aser sheni. The problem here is the seder of your tanai. First, you said Hareini Nazir. And even though Toich Kedei Dibur, you clarified what you meant, there is no such a thing as Toich Kedei Dibur by Kachim over here. And Hareini Nazir is Kachim? Yes, because Hareini Nazir already includes the commitment to bring the karbanos. So he asked his brother-in-law Mahu, and Amar Lei Rabbi Yechanan responded that Nador, the commitment is a commitment, but ve'ena yoytze. Nazir, ve'ena megaleach. Look inside Rashi, 3 lines from the top of the Amid. Nazir ve'ena memois ma'aser element achulin, because the kiv and the Amar 4 lines on top in Rashi. Harei Olai. When you said those words, nischayev, why were you right away obligated? Because the amira ligavoya k'mesira lahedyet, and therefore v'chi hader oimer almenas lav milseim. Or like look inside the top Tosfos, Nazir ve'ena megaleach. According to Rashi and according to Tosfos, it's about the way you were mesader your commitment for dafka the ka'amar hachi. It's only because he ordered it the way the Gemara writes. Avalam amar ipcha, but if this person would have said the opposite, if he would have said almanas she'etzim mishum chagiga, on the condition that I will be allowed to use it also for my chagiga, harei olai toida, then loy means he will be allowed to double dip. Or if a person, when it comes to a nazir, says, like we said, that almanas, that I can bring my karbanos of giluach from ma'aser sheni, harei olai nazir. And he's going to prove it from the story that we're going to continue, God willing, in the next year. Beautiful. But since he ordered it first by making a commitment of the carbon, and that's final with the word, now that he wants to add a stipulation, now it's too late. Now you are already committed. Bottom line is, at least we conclude with the sugya to have it clear. So we began a machlokes b'shamai and b'silul. Very little was learned concerning smicha, even though we had on daf yutes in the bottom of the amid that even lebishamai smicha has to be done before Yom Tov, but a lot more will be, God willing, the next daf. But the nekuda will be is how far is Hillel lenient? Does Hillel allow for you to bring a shalmei neder or nedava? Or like Ula, no, even Beis Hillel holds that even though that you have over here meat that you will eat, there's achilas hedyet. It's from a carbon. A carbon that's not related to Yom Tov may not be offered on Yom Tov proper, and a lot more, God willing, to be continued.
Rabbi.
Yes.
Don't we have this machlokes somewhere? I don't remember if it was in Nazir, but we have this concept of someone making a statement, and the question is, are we willing to break up the statement? So take the first part and not the second part? Or do it when they make the statement, do we say, no, you have to take the whole statement, or take none of the statement?
So this is normally learned, this is called Palginon Dibura, but Palginon Dibura, Danny, is a sugya that we have a lot more in Seder Nezikin, or financial commitments. And dafka, whenever a person is not allowed toich kedei dibur to clarify, that's where, how can you say palginan? You can't allow the latter statement to clarify the first statement. So here for sure, it's too late, Kilo. You already gave it. Here it's more than palginan dibur. Harei olai nazir, done. I'm a nazir. And I'm committed to bring karbanis. Harei olai toida, I have to bring a toida. Now I'm adding, it's too late. It's like after I gave you a gift, I can't add anything. Guys, I'm going to get another coffee. I'm coming right back. Where's Yaakov? Yaakov, just to add, I mean, we spoke it out. I shared your question here online, but aside of the words of Makiv and the Pnimi, Mitoich and Hoyle, just a concept that, you have the Simon or Siba question always. Mitoich to me sounds like as a Siba, and Hoyle sounds more like a Simon. And that has to be worked out properly.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All right. With the help of Hashem, we are learning Beitzah Daf Chaf. We left off on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph, 2 lines from the top of the Amid. We're going to first begin with a story that illustrates that when a person makes a commitment, bitnai, on condition, with a stipulation, the order, the seder of his wordings is going to be tantamount. It's going to be really essential. As we are learning our sugya, Kishitas Rashi, and like Shitas Tosfos, we're going to go back to the machlokes on Daf Yutes between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel and focus on their argument regarding smicha, connected to the sugya of tekev l'smicha shchita, that normally we learn that shchita has to immediately follow the leaning, and Beis Shammai, who says that you don't do smicha on Yom Tov, and we learned on Daf Yutes Amud Aleph on the bottom of the Braisa, you do the smicha prior to Yom Tov. We're going to see whether this relates to their machloikas concerning this principle of tekev l'smicha shchita. We're going to learn stories about Hillel's attitude of pursuing peace versus confrontation. And that was so important. The midah of shalom was so important that Hillel was the one that was mishana mipnei hasholem. Mishana means not that he lied, but he deviated. He wasn't fully emes la'amitoi, not because he didn't value the midah of emes, but because he valued the midah of shalom even more than emes. We're going to also learn how Talmidim of Hillel, they to stand up for their Rebbe, to stand up for Hillel, they did sometimes confront Talmidei Beishamai. Until today, that's the meaning of many Hasidim, that even when the Rebbes, they try to get along, the Hasidim, they really they have a much higher level of confrontation. And when a person has to criticize another, there's a Zamida that we're going to learn that your response should never be greater than the words of criticism. It should be the same. If you were criticized with 3 words and you feel you have to confront and respond only with 3 words and not more. And after that, on Daf Chaf Amid Beis, we're going to come back to the discussion that we had in the beginning on Daf Yutes, the whole Daf Yutes Amid Beis, as far to this question, what is Shitas Beis Hillel, whether Beis Hillel allows for you to bring shlamim that are in the category of neder and adava on Yom Tiv. In other words, or Beis Hillel is only allowing for you to bring karbanos Yom Tiv related shlamim on Yom Tiv. But if it's not related to Yom Tiv, then even Beis Hillel will hold that you may not bring it. And according to that opinion, what will happen if someone did bring a shlamim that was a neder and an adava? They brought it, they shechted it. Now what? No, what's the question is, do you now bring the blood? Are you zoydek the dam, or are you not zoydek the dam? Well, if you're zoydek the dam, you'll be able to put on the emurim. If you put on the emurim, then you'll be able to eat it, or not, and much, much more. So we are on Daf Chaf Amud Aleph. We are 2 lines from the top of the Amud by the 2 dots. Really, we're learning a story. This is not an Agadata. This is going to be a story that's going to illustrate that even when, if you would have ordered the stipulation, it would have been effective, but the Seder is tantamount. And it's a phenomenal story. Hahu Gavra. There was a person, the Amar Lahu, that said, give 400 golden coins to Chaim Yankel. Now he wants for so-and-so Chaim Yankel to marry his daughter. Really, he wants to say that if he'll marry my daughter, I'll give him 400 zuz. He didn't word it that way. He said, give him 400 zuz. And then, Vilnesiv Barati, and he should marry my daughter. Now, as we spoke at the end of the last year, normally, when you make a statement, you have a small amount of time, which we call that toich kedei dibur, within the time that it takes for you to say either Shalom Alecha Rebbe or Shalom Alecha Rebbe Umayri Machlekes. You can clarify what you meant. You can even retract that which you said. Now here, we're not speaking about kachim. Here we're speaking about a financial commitment. When it comes to financial commitments, you normally have that time frame, but we have to clarify that this Gavra was a shchiv merah, says Rashi. That means he was dying. And there's a rule that when someone is in the process of dying, the sages said that his words are tantamount to making a kinyan. So that's why here, like in the case above, he said, give to so-and-so 400 zuz. That statement is final. Now he adds, and let him marry my daughter. Too late. The Seder was wrong. Amar Rav Papa, based on what we learned above, Abba Meya Shakel. That Chaim Yankel, who are calling him, he gets the 400 zuz. Uberate. What about the daughter? It's up to him. Iboya Nasiv. If he wants, he can marry her. Iboya Loy Nasiv. Lerashi Ula Toisvis. And that's the Hemshech. Talmud the Amar, that's the right the Toisvis brings that we learned the Toisvis at the end of last year. Talmud the Amar Havali, the only reason why it's not binding, in other words, we don't say that if you don't marry the daughter, you don't get the money, is because first he said Havali, give him the money. Then he said Ulinesiv or Vilinesiv. Aval, however, if he would have changed the Seder, Aval Amar Vilinesiv, if he would have says, let him marry my daughter and give him. Then we would make it connected. Then we would say, Inasiv shakel, Ilay nasiv, loy shakel. Seder order is extremely important.
Rabbi, are we talking about like a bita ketana here, or
No.
Like where it says that he's marrying her off, or it's just
No. It's a person who is a dying man who wants to make sure that so-and-so, if so-and-so will marry his daughter, he's giving a dowry. But you have to be careful how you order things. Okay, now let's go back for a second. The concept, the rule that we learned at the end of the last year, that if you have an obligation to do something, you can't use money that anyways is already a obligation money and doubled it. Which is why we said that if a person, when he separates an animal and he says, this is going to be a carbon toida, if I can also use it, right? It doesn't work because of the order. That was a question that was asked from Reish Lakish. That was the answer that was given by Rabbi Yechanan. However, Yosef Merema, the Ka'amar Lahashmaitza Mishmeidan Afshei, that he didn't have a version of a question and an answer. He just made a statement that if a person says Harei Olai Toida, Ve'etze Ba Yedei Chagiga, if you make such a statement, so then the person has to bring a carbon toida, but he may not use it for his obligation of chagig. But he didn't quote anyone, and there was no question and answer. So Amalei Ravina Lamareimar, Aton Hachimas Nismla, very nice. You're saying your own din. But Anan, but our version was but we had it as a question and an answer. Now, guys, this goes beyond. Not only is Oimer Davar b'Shem Oimroi, I think there's much more to this. Much more to this is that the correct way of learning is questions and answers. If you don't, the question is gold. Question means that you're curious. The question means that it's bothering you. So you're going to be open to the answer, or you'll challenge the answer. You'll remember the answer. So it's much better to have a version where there was a question, where there was an answer, than stam to learn it straight. Someone once told me when we were younger in yeshiva that the problem we have is that we have all the answers before the questions. When we went on Mivtzoyim, we don't even appreciate it. Masha'engen, a person who questions and questions, and then when they hear the things that we take for granted, they appreciate it better. They remember it better. They understand what the answer is answered. Okay, however, we're coming back here to the machlokes we had on Daf Yutes Amud Aleph between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel regarding the mitzvah of doing smicha. Smicha means to lean. Smicha in this context is that when you bring almost all of the karbanos, the owner would lean with his hands on the head of the animal with all of his might. Either he would say words of confession or he would say words of praise. And it's not essential, but it's one of the mitzvahs that come together with karbanos. Beis Shammai says that you don't do smicha. And Yom Tov Beis Hillel says that if you bring a carbon, you do smicha. Says the Gemara, Tanach Kamei Rabbi Yitzchak Barab. And you had these Amoraim, they know all the Tanas, they know all of the Braisas by heart. So such a Braisa teacher was standing in front of Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Abba, and he quoted the following, from memory, the following Braisa. This Braisa is based on a pasuk in Parsha Shmini. There the pasuk says, Vayakrev es ha'oila vayaseh ha'kam mishpat. They were speaking about the obligation oila that Aaron HaKohen needed to bring on Shmini L'Biluim, in oilas choiva. And when it says that he brought it and he did it as its rules, kamishpat oilas lindava, it means that he needed to do it like God wrote out how an oila, a voluntary oila, is brought. In Parshas Vayikra, the Torah says regarding a voluntary oila, the somach yodoi al roisha oila. Before you bring a carbon oila, you have to lean your hands. The Torah never writes that when you bring an obligatory oila, you have to do smicha as well. This pasuk in Shmini is being used to tell you that yes, even an oilas chayva needs to have smicha prior. Limeid al oilas chayva shetuuna smicha. Which also means, according to this Tana, that if not for this verse, on our own, we wouldn't have known that. Now that's a little bit of a problem, because there is a general way of learning Torah Shabbat Peh, and that's called a binyanav. Okay, the Torah doesn't have to write everything everywhere. The Torah wrote by Oilas Nadava du Smicha. One can argue, okay, so if you see that there's smicha by an oila, do a smicha by the oila. Nadava, choiva is not that important. No. This Tana needs to have a limit. So Amar Lei, Rabbi Yitzchak told this Tana teacher, the Amar Lach, you know who must have been authored, you know who authored this Braisa? Those who follow the sheet of Beis Shammai. What's Beis Shammai have to do with this? So added Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba, the loigamri shalmei choiva mishalmei nedava. Gewaldig. That what? That we see from our Mishnah, Beis Shammai holds that even though a shlamim that's obligatory, a communal shlamim, is brought on Yom Tov. But let's go further. Shlamim that even the shlamim that is brought on Yom Tov, Beis Shammai says you don't do smicha. That's what Beis Shammai says. Why don't you do smicha? You should know, Chavra, that by Shalmei Choiva, by Shalmei Nedava, the Torah also says you do smicha. So we quoted before a verse in Vayikra concerning a Nedava Oila, the Samach Yadoi. The Torah also speaks about a Shalmei Nedava that you do smicha. If Beis Shammai would have held that since the Torah speaks about smicha by shlamim, even though it's Nedava, automatically you make a binyan av and you learn it to Nedava, if there would be an obligation, a biblical obligation to do smicha by a Shalmei Choiva, then Beis Shammai would hold when you bring a shlamim on Yom Tov, Shalmei Choiva, then you have to make smicha. The fact that Beis Shammai says you don't do smicha in the Mishnah is because Beis Shammai does not subscribe to a binyan av. So therefore, just like he doesn't learn Shalmei Choiva from Shalmei Nedava, makes sense that you can't learn Oila Choiva from Oila Nedava, which is why you need to have the pasuk Vayakriv es Oila v'Yisrael Kamishpa. Because if we would follow Beis Hillel, so understood Rabbi Yitzchak in our Mishnah, even the Gomri Shalmei Choiva and Shalmei Nedava, which is why Rabbi Yitzchak understands Beis Hillel holds you do smicha on Yom Tov. There is an isur to do smicha. You can't make use of an animal on Yom Tov. Why do you do smicha? Obviously, because Beis Hillel holds that you have a binyan av. The Torah says when you bring a shalmei nedava, make smicha. Must be that when you bring any shlamim, even a chayva, you make smicha, even on Yom Tov. So according to Beis Hillel, that we would do the same thing. Oilas chayva nami, according to Beis Hillel, loiti ba'yikra, because we would use the binyan av to learn it from oilas nedava. So the Beitzah that you are teaching only follows Beis Shammai. Questions the Gemara against Rabbi Yitzchak bar Abba. Umimai de Beis Hillel Shalmei Choiva mishalmei nedava gomri. Which is why you're saying, and therefore Beis Hillel will also automatically know oilas choiva from oilas nedava. No, maybe ma oilas choiva gomri. What we compare is not shlamim. What we compare is choiva. How to taka? Beis Hillel says in our Mishnah that the shlamim that you bring on Yom Tov needs smicha on Yom Tov. You know how he knows it? Because he makes a binyan av from oilas choiva. Choiva can be learned binyan av. But how does Beis Hillel himself know that an oilas choiva demands smicha? Maybe he needs to have this pasuk. In other words, what is more compatible? Oila shlamim, or neder choiva. And beautiful. So that's it. So therefore, maybe the author is also Beis Hillel. So counters the Gemara. You're telling me that Beis Hillel cannot just have a binyan av shlamim chayva from shlamim nedava. And the Torah writes by a shalmei nedava smicha. Why? Because shekein mitzuyin. Interesting concept. That anything that is more common might need smicha, but doesn't mean that things that are less common also need smicha. It's the commonality. It's how much, how often. If that's enough to take away the binyan av, I'll argue, how would Beis Hillel be able to learn it just from choivas oila when it's also different? Because oila is completely burnt. Shlamim is not completely burnt. So the Gemara says, no. Beis Hillel learns it mi beinaya. Beis Hillel learns that you have to do smicha on shalmei choiva, both from oilas choiva and from shalmei nedava. But how does Beis Hillel know that an oilas choiva needs to have smicha? He also will need to have the pasuk. So therefore, the Beitzah goes l'kol ha'am. Okay, so now the Gemara says, which is again the way it sounds like when you read in the Mishnah that on Yom Tov you're not going to do smicha. 1 second. Now let me just say it like this: no one thinks that Beis Shammai holds that you don't do smicha on shalmei choiva. No, but there is Are you required or is it better? That's the big difference. If you are required to do smicha, then you'll have to do it on Yom Tov. The moment your carbon is brought on Yom Tov, you do smicha on Yom Tov. The word is that Rabbi Yitzchak says that Beis Shammai holds you're not required. It's a mitzvah to do it. But since you're not required, now that it's Yom Tov, and B'chlal on Yom Tov, there's a prohibition of making use of an animal, that's why you don't do it. So the Savra Beis Shammai that it's not an obligation, Shal Mechayva is not required. V'hatanya Amar Rav Yosi, again coming back to our Mishnah Daf Yutes, Lo nechleku Beis Shammai uBeis Hillel al hasmicha atzma, that yes shetzarich. Al menechleku. Now the question is, how will Beis Shammai learn it? If Beis Shammai does not subscribe to a binyan of, how does he know that there's a requirement? Al menechleku, only concerning this rule of tekev lasmicha shchita, where the shchita must immediately follow the leaning. That Beis Shammai holds that this is what's not needed. Einoi tzarich. You have to do smicha, but do smicha erev Yom Tov. And Beis Hillel oimrim that yes tzarich. So here we got a problem. If that's the case, if Beis Shammai also holds that you need to have smicha, how does Beis Shammai know that Shal Mechayve needs smicha? Nowhere does the Torah write that Shal Mechayve needs smicha. It must be that he also subscribes to a binyan av. Just to make that clear. So the Gemara says, now it's not going to take away the Beitzah, because even if I'll have a binyan av, well, like we said above, maybe Beis Shammai was unable to learn oilas chayver from oilas nodava. For that, you need to have a pasuk. But now that you have a pasuk that is even including oilas chayva, between oilas chayva and shalmei nedava together, mibeinayo, you can learn shalmei chayva. But Rabbi Yitzchak doesn't say that. So the Gemara says that Rabbi Yitzchak follows a clear Tana. The Tanya Amar Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Yehuda. They both hold that whenever smicha is a requirement, it must be followed by shchita. Smicha, shchita. Al menechleku, al smicha atzma. That Beis Shammai holds ein tzarich. It's not required. It's a mitzvah, but there's no requirement. Beis Hillel holds that it's required. Mamash what Rabbi Yitzchak says. And therefore, when you do something beyond the letter of the law, good for you, as long as you are not breaking another rule. But since on Yom Tov there is the other rule that you can't lean on an animal, you can't be mishtamish b'balachayim. Therefore, Beis Shammai holds that you do not do smicha. All right. Bottom line is, my friends, we have a machlokes. Can you bring? Let's go to oilas re'iyah. That's clear. Every Yom Tov we are obligated to bring a carbon that's completely burnt on the altar. It's called oilas re'iyah. I'm coming to see and to be seen. God is going to see me, and I'm going to experience. That's amazing, and especially Bisman Bayis Vision, you would see godliness in the Beis Hamikdash. You have to bring a carbon oil. Was that carbon oil brought on Yom Tov or not? Now, where's Tzvik over here? Here, the oil is not eaten at all. Nevertheless, Beis Hillel said on the Mishnah that you bring oilos. That's for sure. You bring a carbon oil. Beis Shammai holds that you don't bring a carbon oil, even though it's connected to Yom Tov, on Yom Tov. So now we're going to learn a story. What happened in the Beis Hamikdash? In the Beis Hamikdash, this is before the Eruvin's Baskoil, that halacha ki Beis Hillel, there was a long period of time where you had, different rules. And what would happen if in the Azar in the Beis Hamikdash, it was filled with Talmidei Beis Shammai? So listen to what happened. Tana Rabban. Ma'aseh Be'il Azaken. Shehevi oilosi la'azar. It was Yom Tov. Hillel himself comes to the Beis Hamikdash. He comes with a carbon oil. Now it's interesting that a carbon oil has to be a male. A oil cannot be female. A shlomim can be both genders. We don't care. It can be male, it can be female. Now, in other words, if I see a yid in the Azara that's with a male animal, I don't know whether it's an oil. Could be oil, could be a shlomim. But if it's a female animal, it must be a shlomim. And not only that, lismoich Allah b'yantiv, which is hishita. If they would have seen him doing smicha, that in itself would have provoked the Talmidei Beis Shammai to confront Hillel, which they did. But they didn't see the smicha. Even though smicha has to be done right before, they didn't see. What they saw was he's about to shecht an animal. Chavru all of Talmidei Shammai hazakin. That's not so common. So the Hasidim of one Rebbe, they ganged up on the Rebbe, and Amru Loi, Mativa shel behemosu. Upa, what are you bringing over here? Now, what did we also learn? We learned that Beis Shammai is moida, that the Shalmei Chagiga could be brought on Yom Tov, because you're eating it. That's Oichel Nefesh, Achilas Hedin. So what the emes was, it was an oilam. If Hillel would have said this is an oilam, there would have been a confrontation. In order to promote peace, he deviated from the truth. Amar lahem nekevehi. It's interesting that we don't use the word sheker, we use the words mishana. Every male has a certain female part to them. Hostu. Today's Meshuggah in the world. So it was a shino, it wasn't a pure sheker. And look inside the last Rashi in the Amid. Rashi Zok, the last line, because of his humility, he wasn't afraid of a confrontation. He was just very humble. Now they were not going to believe him. You know what he did? He began to move the tail, because when you move the tail, you can see the gender of the animal. So when they saw that he's going to show them that it's a female, which would prove a female cannot be an oilam, they didn't look. So kishkesh lahem bizunav, he began to shake the tail, and when they saw Taka that he is saying that it's a shlamim, it's not male, and he's going to show them, and he avoided the confrontation. And you should know, says the Beitzah, happened to be that on that day in the Azara there were so many Talmidei Beis Shammai that they had the upper hand. They had the upper hand. They weren't paskening dinim, but they could have imposed their halacha that no one can bring an oilas re'iyah. And therefore, they were out. They were out to get Hillel. So and Ubava ben Buta Shemai. So this is the beauty. Even though he was Talmidei Shammai, but he knew that the halacha follows Beis Hillel. He knew because there wasn't yet the Baskoi. In order to prevent them of forcing Beis Shammai, even though he was, as we say, Talmidei Shammai Hazakin. So v'shalach nafchaf amid beis vehevi kol tzoin Kedar. Kedar is a name of a location, and the best sheep is the sheep that comes from Kedar. He brought the best sheep from Yerushalayim. Ve'emidam ba'azara, and he brought it into the Azara. By the way, Tab Tosfos says there's a rule: a carbon that's not consecrated may not be brought into the Azara. So it must mean that he didn't bring it into the Azara, but he brought it into Harabayis. He brought in a tremendous amount of animals. And Va'amar, and he said the second line, Kol mi sheroitza lismach yova v'yismach. Whoever wants to do smicha. Now, smicha, according to Beis Shammai, you never do smicha. In other words, he made sure that everyone should behave like Beis Hillel. And indeed, because of Bava ben Buta's action, for Oisa Hayoim, Gavra Yodam shel Beis Hillel, and V'kava Alachi Kemoisan, after that, no one made an issue of it anymore. So it's an amazing story. So Hillel himself did not confront. From Talmidei Shammai there was Azahisabcha, and that's how it worked. And that's the best way to resolve a conflict. You have to get someone from the other side to come over. Now let's go weiter. Shuv Maisa, the Talmud Echad, from the Talmidei Beis Hillel. And we'll see that Talmidei Beis Hillel, even though you would argue that Talmidim of Beis Hillel, they should follow what the Rebbe does. The Rebbe was Mishanim b'pnei HaShalom. They were not Mishanim b'pnei HaShalom. They were Hasidim. They were standing up for their Rebbe. Shehevi oilas elazara lismeichalav. It's double against Shammai. Oilas re'iyah, Beis Shammai says you can't. And smicha, even by Shlomim, Beis Shammai says you can't. So Matzu Talmud Echad Mitalmidei Beis Shammai, and he confronted him by saying, Amrullah, Mazu Smicha, was tust du? You're violating Beis Shammai. So instead of him being quiet, Amrullah, Mazu Shtika, why are you What's this? You should be quiet. Schweig. That's it. That was his counter. And the way he stood up, and he wasn't epking and bepking and explaining and this. No, be quiet. Is shiskoi v'nezifa. He silenced him with this type of rebuke, and v'halachloi, and he left him alone. Can Hillel avoid in confrontation? Isn't this the story of all Hasidic groups? The Rebbes are got tzaddikim, but the Hasidim, they're not that afraid of a confrontation. Amar Abaye, even the confrontation of the Talmidim wasn't that heavy. The criticism was mazu smicha, 3 words, and the rebuke was mazu shtika, 3 words, not more. Hilka chaytzar the Amar lechabre milsa. If someone told you something and you feel that there's a need to respond, don't use more words than the words that were used against you. And we learned it from here, the Iu Amar Mali Smicha, and all he told him was Mali Shtiko. And he wasn't using a greater degree of a counter than the words of criticism themselves. Okay, weiter. So let's recap, Cheder. Everyone is moida that the Shalmei Chagiga could be brought. When Beis Shammai for sure does not allow Nedarim and Nedavis if they're not related to Yom Tov. You can't bring it. We had in the last daf a machloikas tanoim. What does Beis Hillel hold? Some hold that Beis Hillel holds that even Nedarim and Nedavos can also be brought on Yom Tov, even though they're not related to Yom Tov, because since some of the shlamim is eaten by the owner, there's achilas hedyet. So that's the Torah says that for food related purposes, there's no restrictions on Yom Tov. Other Tanoim hold that Beis Hillel only allows shlamim that's connected to Yom Tov, but ein nedarim unadavis. There was a machlekes b'shitas Beis Hillel. Now we're going to go and learn braises back and forth between Beis Hillel and Beis Shammai. There are 2 versions of their back and forth, and from these 2 versions we will see again that there is a machlekes Tanoim what Beis Hillel holds. So Tanya we learn amru lahem Beis Hillel Beis Shammai. This is not a debate in the Beis Hamikdash, which is much more heated because there it's B'poel Mamish. This is in the Beis Midrash. In other words, Beis Shammai holds chevre that oilas re'iyah cannot be brought. That's what we learned. Everyone holds that. Beis Hillel holds that an oilas re'iyah could be brought. So concerning this, Beis Hillel tells Beis Shammai, I don't understand. Uma b'makam she'asa lehedyet. B'makam she'asa means Shabbos Kodesh. Shabbos Kodesh. All of the malachas, even on Tzvei Chaychol Nefesh, may not be done. Nevertheless, in the Beis Hamikdash, if there is a korban that is communal, related to a time frame, related to Shabbos or Yom Tov, b'moy adoi, even Shabbos, it may be brought. Muter l'gavaya. So therefore, argues Beis Hillel, makim shemuter lehedyet, when it comes to a day where you can make food for a hedyet, einoi din shemuter l'gavaya, you can make food for God. In other words, who cares that the oil is not eaten, not even by the Kohanim? It's eaten kaviyachal by the Mizbeach. It's eaten by God. It should be allowed. No. I'll prove to you from the Nedarim and Nedavos that even though if you would be slaughtering an animal for you to eat, it would be permitted. Yet in the Beis Hamikdash, it may not be brought. Now, guys, don't forget, Beis Shammai is saying it to Beis Hillel. According to this version, we'll call this the Tanakama, it's clear that Beis Shammai knew that Beis Hillel holds that Nedarim and Nedavos of Shlamim may not be brought on Yom Tov. If not, this counter doesn't make sense. Okay, very good. But since you yourself are moida that even Shlamim, Nedarim and Nedavos may not be brought, so therefore, oilas re'iyah, which is taka achila legavoya, it may not be brought. Amru lahem Beis Hillel, no. Is true. Ich bin moed according to this version that it may not be brought over Yom Tov, even though it's shlamim because she'ein kavol lahem zman. Because why bring it on Yom Tov? The whole mitzvah of Oilas Re'iyah is connected to Shkvol Zman. It has to be brought over Yom Tov. Now, guys, just to make it clear, it's not that you can only bring it on the first day, the Seder, but it's connected to Yom Tov. It begins on the first day. Amru lehem beishamai, no, afzu ein kvol lehem zman. No, you don't have to bring it on Yom Tov itself. The Tanach, like we learn, that mi shaloi chag b'yom harishon shel chag. This is not about the oil, this is about the chagiga. Don't forget, even Beishamai holds that a kshalmei chagiga is brought without smicha, but it's brought on Yom Tov. If you didn't, chagig v'oilach kol regel kuloi. Very good. Not only kol regel kuloi, but if you're speaking about sukkos, as far as Shmini Atzeres is concerned, the Yom Tov ha'achron shel chag you can also bring the chagiga that you should have brought on the first day of Sukkot. So therefore, it's not azoy zmanoi kavua. You're right. You're right. You can bring it also on Chol Hamoed. You can also bring it on the last days, but still, avzu kavua lehem zman. It's still connected to azman. The Tanan that if avar haregel v'lo chag, if all of Yom Tov went by and you didn't bring it, you are no longer responsible for the animal. What does that mean? It means that since it may not be brought, you cannot even make it up, which means there's a limited time frame. That's why you could bring it. But again, according to this version, B'shitas Besil, but a shlamim of a neder and an adava, it's not bound to a time frame of Yom Tov. It's not b'chlal connected to Yom Tov. That may not be brought. So take that out of the equation. One second. How can you say again that an oilas re'iyah can be brought? What's your argument? That it's for Hashem, it's Hashem's food. So what? It says, lochem, the whole verse, the source that there is a dispensation to violate malachas, l'tzoyrech oichel nefesh, comes from the pasuk in Boy concerning the Korban Pesach, where it says, ach asher yei ochel l'chol nefesh, hu levade yei oseh lochem. You can do that for you. For you, l'chayra excludes l'gavoya. So amru lehem beis Hillel, no. It says in Parshas Emor, v'chagoysam oisoi chag lashem. Now the word there, lashem, is extra. The word lashem is not only teaching you that the chagiga can be brought on Yom Tov, but kol dil lashem, even the oil can be brought on Yom Tov. It says lochem. Lochem is coming to tell you that there are certain areas where you may not prepare food on Yom Tov. That's taka to tell you lochem v'loy lekutim, lochem v'loy leklavim. You can't violate a malacha to feed animals, even though if you own an animal, you're obligated to feed your animals before you eat, but you can't violate a malacha. You may not prepare food for non-Jews. And by the way, mikan, many people erroneously think that there is an issue of having a non-Jew for the Seder. It's not true. There's nothing specifically about the Seder, but there is a general theoretical problem having non-Jews on your table on any Yom Tov, but you could have a non-Jew on Shabbos, because on Shabbos you're not preparing food at all. On Yom Tov, since you are preparing food, but that's the lochem, you may not break a malacha to prepare food for a non-Jew. When people have very limited amounts of foods and they know exactly how many guests they're having, and if there's one more guest, we'll make another potato, that's a problem. Not only Pesach for every Yom. Now, this is one version of the back and forth of Beishamai and Beis Hillel, and it's clear that even Beis Hillel is moida that shlamim that are nedarim and nedavis may not be brought over Yom Tov. However, Abba Shaul has another version of the back and forth, and clearly, Abba Shaul, Beis Hillel holds that shlamim is allowed to be brought nedarim and nedavis on Yom Tov. That what was so. First thing was that this is what Beis Hillel was telling Beis Shammai. On the day where your stove is sealed, it's like another expression of Shabbos. Nevertheless, kiras rabach pesucha, the master's oven is open. That's the bimoy adoy tamid musaf brought on in the Beis Hamikdash on Shabbos Kodesh. So b'makom shekiras pesucha on Yom Tov, where your oven is also open. Ain't din that the kiras rabach should be pesucha, and you should be allowed to bring an oilas re'iyah on Yom Tov. And v'chein bedin, b'chlal, it makes sense. But your table will be full, and the table of your Rebbe, referring to God Almighty, will be empty. Doesn't make sense. Now, here, we don't have Beis Shammai's objection, nedarim and nedavis cannot be brought. They didn't say it in this Abba Shaul's version. The Ma'kom Miflegi, clearly that's the machlokes, that Mar Savar going to Abba Shaul, that nedarim and nedavis are kerevim b'Yom Tov, according to Beis Hillel. So Beis Shammai could not have told Beis Hillel, you are moide shlamim is not brought. Beis Hillel is not. Umar Savar, the Tanach holds that even Lebeis Hillel ain't kreven b'yantiv. So good. So now we have already the second daf that there is a machloikis Tanoim and therefore Amoyroim. What is the shita of Beis Hillel? Amar Afuna ledivrei ha'omer that Beis Hillel holds, even Beis Hillel holds that nedarim and nedavis, even shlamim tzvika that you can eat, still ain't kreven b'yantiv. I want you to know, don't say that this chumrah they view only as a rabbinic chumrah. Like tema that really midairaisa mechsi chazei, but it's only v'rabbanan who the gazrebu who gzeira shema yasha. They only said that you may not bring shlamim l'radavis on Yom Tiv because they were afraid that you won't bring it until Yom Tiv. And once you wait until Yom Tiv, we learned a little bit on the last daf, a topic that we'll learn again in the Rosh Hashanah daf Dalid. There is a violation of Bal Ta'acher. Don't delay bringing karbanos. We definitely don't like for people to wait until the last second, because if you wait until the last second and then an oinus happens, you won't end up bringing it. So by allowing people to bring the danim and the davis on Yom Tov, a person during the year will say, why should I bring it now? I'm going to the base. I think I'll bring it then. There is a logic to say that midrabanan, don't bring it on Yom Tov, which will oblige people to come earlier to bring it. But don't learn pshat that way. I'll tell you that according to these opinions, afilo midoiraisa nami lichazin. Why? Where do we see that? The shtei halechem that has to bring on Shavuos, if you remember, you know when they would bake it, they would not bake it on Yom Tov. They would not even bake this on Yom Tov. They would bake it out of Yom Tov. There's no issue of you delaying it. You can only bring it on Yom Tov. You can't bring it early. Nevertheless, so what do we see over here? That malachos that are being violated for heavenly needs, even later it's going to be eaten, may not be done. Wow. Okay. Says the Gemara. After this whole machlokes, and now that we have this version that holds that even Lebeis Hillel, shlamim, even shlamim, nedarim and nedavis may not be brought on Yom Tov. What happens if they made a mistake? Avar v'shachat, we're dafka shachat, and now there's the dam. Are you allowed to throw the dam, or are you not allowed to throw the dam? So Rava says yes. Why this is key? Almanas lahatir basar ba'achila. No, it's the good thing is we want for you to eat it. If you will eat it after the fact, at least it was eaten. Oichel nefesh. And since you cannot eat it if you don't throw the dam, throw the dam. But the key is we want for you to be allowed to eat it, which implies if something happened to the meat, if all the meat was lost, you still have the emurim. If not, you can't throw the dam. If all the meat became tamei, according to Rava, you would not throw the dam. However, Rabba Barafuna says, the reason, I also agree that the dam should be thrown, but you know why Zodek as a dam? In order for you to be able to bring the emurim, and you know what? You don't bring the emurim during the day. Again, we're going with the shitas that hold that nedarim and nedavis ain't kreven b'yamtiv. But you know what? If the dam is sprinkled of a carbon today, the hekter chalavim ve'evarim can be done the whole night. Midrabanan until midnight, but the whole night. Almanas like tirum la'erev. In other words, what's the ikir? Is the ikir to throw the dam for achila of the kohanim, or is the ikir of throwing the dam in order to be makter the emurim? Achilas mizbeach, achilas kohanim. And again, just to quote in Chassidus, that achilas mizbeach is the ending of the avoid of birurim. That is viewed the ikir, or adarabba, that kohanim oichlem ba'olam ischaprim, the concept of achila. And perhaps that's even said, perhaps on the achila of the balabas, that after we eat, after all of the emurim were burned, that's the concept of the avodah of yechudim, or the avodah of aliyahs, taking something that's already good from one level and bringing it into a higher level. Now, my benayu halacha l'maisa between Rava and Rabba Barafuna, ike benayu, what we mentioned. If before the zirikas adam the meat became tamei, or if the meat was lost, according to Rava, don't throw it. According to Rabba Barafuna, throw it, because like this you can bring the emurim at night. Meisvei, this will be a kasha against the shita of Rabba Barafuna. It says in a brayso, kifsei atzeres, that were slaughtered shaloi lishman. For example, They made a mistake. They slaughtered it l'shem oila. Guys, what's the first Mishnah in Zvachim? Kol hazvachim. Shenizbuchu shaloi l'shman. Kshedim, remember? Elo shaloi olo l'bolim l'shem chayva. Chutz from Chatos and Pesach. A classical case. Zivchei kifsei atzeres is the shalmei tzibur. Shlamim. If by mistake they offered it l'shem oila, or if they shechted it before the right time, erev Yom Tiv, or after the right time, says the Beitzah hadam yizarik. V'habasar yei achel. Wow. Now, the Shabbos, see, the problem is on Shabbos you can't eat the meat because you can't cook the meat. So then lo yizroik. Mama sounds like Rava. Since you can't eat it, don't throw the dam. However, if you threw the blood, daf chaf aleph, then churza, it's acceptable. Why? Because the zrikas adam had some effect. Al manas lahaktin emurim le'erev. Since, in other words, burn the emurim at night. Burn the emurim at night, but only throw it if you are able to eat it. So l'cha'ira im zarak means the yavedin lachatchil oloi, because it's Shabbos. So bishlem l'rava nicha, because since it's Shabbos and you can't make meat on Shabbos, and the zrikas adam is justified only for eating, you can't eat, you shouldn't do it. According to the Barafuna, that you are able to be makted in murim at night, then why would it be only with the yavid? It should be lachatchila. So first of all, kasha. The Iba Yisema, that I would argue that since this Beitzah is speaking about Shabbos, for Shabbos we're more strict. The Iba Yisema, Shani Shavuos Shabbos Mishvus Yom Tiv. We are more stringent on Shabbos, and even Rabba Barafuna that holds that for Yom Tiv, if you can be makter the imurim, you are lachatchila allowed to sprinkle the dam. On Shabbos, it's only a b'diavad. We'll stop over here, and God willing, to be continued still in our sugya of korbanos and oichel nefesh.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Go ahead, Chavra.
Thank you.